It popped his Dark Souls cherry. We're watching manly reviews. This game shouldn't have succeeded.
Dark Souls.
Yes.
I love Dark Souls. I love this thing more than Tom Brady loved his own son. And if you're wondering why every YouTuber with a checkmark seems to eventually make a video about this thing, it's because even though we've all played the same game, everyone walks away with it with a different story to tell. It's a deeply personalized experience where the hardest enemy you have to defeat in the game is yourself. And the camera. I've never seen a game so
Yes, the camera.
recommended by other people and so scheduled to addictive that it resembles a prescription. Most community members will even recommend it for a whole host of mental debuffs, and it makes sense. The gameplay of Dark Souls is a digital cold plunge, and its lore and characters are more inspirational than most Goggins podcast clips.
I was running by a graveyard. I was fat. And I ran by a graveyard, and I looked out there. I was fat. And I'm running a 300-pound man thinking, man,
But its themes of
Sometimes you need to be fat to overcome Dark Souls.
overcoming adversity in the face of defeat go far beyond just its characters. On launch, the original Dark Souls came out of buttfuck nowhere with nothing to its name, in one of the most fragile states a video game can release in, only for it to become one of the most influential titles in the last 13 years of gaming. It created a genre, it created a culture, it created whole ass jobs for people just talking.
Exactly. There's people just talking about lore about this that's making thousands of dollars a month in lore videos. Like, what? This game is like economy building.
About its story on the internet. It inspired hundreds of Souls-like games, even some good ones. But despite all of its legacy,
Facts.
the Souls franchise wouldn't even exist if it weren't for Sony cock-watching the success of the Xbox 360 during the heat of the console wars and tried to rip off one of their best-selling games. And failed. We'll get to that in a second. But before we get into how this franchise almost didn't even exist and that Demon's Souls actually wasn't created by Miyazaki at the start, I recently had surgery and I live in America. So, you already know it's sponsor time. Big thanks to
Oh no. Don't have surgery in America, guys.
Opera GX. I actually reached out to them for them to pay me for an ad slot because I don't know about you guys, but Chrome has been completely shitting itself lately. Ever since YouTube went the whole
You guys ever notice that there's a lot of Opera GX ads? Opera, I watch my React videos on you. Sponsor me. I need to pay for my coffee addiction.
pay-to-win formula with Premium, I feel like everything's been lagging out constantly, despite the fact that it takes more resources than After Effects. And I pay for Premium. So I decided to try out Opera GX.
I don't like when people lie in videos though, because I am literally streaming and I have both Chrome and Opera GX open and they're both using barely any resources. Just saying.
It's because all my YouTube buddies were using it and they make a lot of kind of mildly unfunny mid-tier jokes on Twitter. And as a mindless consumer, that means something to me. I gotta say, I've been daily driving it for about a couple weeks now, and it's pretty great. I mean, it's a web browser, so like, don't go fucking crazy. Or maybe you should, because Opera kind of mogs the fuck out of Chrome. So let me tell you why. First off, it actually runs YouTube faster than Chrome with like 1/10 of the resources, so it's finally nice to click a YouTube video without it like host migrating. But that's just the start. Say you're someone on the spectrum and you're watching one of those 6-hour-long YouTube video essays on a title that you don't care about and will probably still watch twice. If you open up another tab while it's playing, that window will now show up anywhere on your desktop that you can resize and
Like, that's a cool feature, but like, how do I turn it off? Because I don't want that.
reposition. That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Chrome doesn't do that. I don't know why. It gets even better. Opera has these things called mods, which allow you to completely overhaul the look and feel of the browser with things like custom animations, backgrounds, shaders, sounds that play whenever you open or close tabs or type.
See, I say, like, it's great. He needs to make money. You know what I mean? He needs to make money, so he's gonna make these ads. Good for him. Do it. But don't lie. I mean, if you don't know, then you don't know. But don't lie.
This is nice. It's nice, but it's not the pipe sound effect. You can customize the stuff to your heart's content. You can even install a Dark Souls mod, because that's the theme of the video, and maybe life's not depressing enough for you. Opera is loaded with tons of other features too. They have all these app integrations with
What are you talking about? Dark Souls brings me nothing but joy.
Discord and Twitter, and they also have this little AI assistant thing for all your quirky little AI needs, because it's 2024 and everything needs that now. Also, every single plugin that works.
So much shit needs AI. And you know what's terrible? Things will be labeled AI that is not AI. It's just like It's not AI. It's not actually artificial intelligence. It's just a computer program that's designed to recommend shit to you. It's not actually an AI.
Works in Chrome, also works in Opera, so the transition is super easy. And lastly, Opera actually lets you limit CPU and RAM usage, which is crazy that other programs don't do this. This is like,
Oh no, I don't fault him at all. It's 100% Opera GX. I mean, sponsor me, but also don't. And yes, the Dark Souls one looks very cozy.
it's Opera's fantastic. I'm telling you, Opera GX comes highly regarded, so don't be so download it today.
That's the thing. Like, I wonder how much sponsors actually pay for these like big content creators like this, because they're making good money off of ads, right? So like those sponsorships must be paying out the wazoo for these ads. Like, I'm talking about like a shit ton, like making it more worth it to do this whole segment in a video that will still make them ad revenue. So like this must be paying them a lot, right?
For free using the link down in the description. Thank you guys for being patient. Now that I have my medical bills paid, we can go on to the rest of the video. I've been wanting to talk about this game ever since 2015, and to this day, it is still my second favorite experience I've ever had that involves this amount of dudes moaning. The first being Dark Souls 3. But unlike that game, which served as the
Exactly. My crippling coffee addiction. I need that money. It must be enough, right? It must be enough.
entry point for many people into the series, the first Dark Souls was the one that originally popped my humanity on the Souls franchise. And ever since my first playthrough, I know I'd be
It popped his Dark Souls cherry.
stroking this thing off till the end of time. But man, that sure was not the case, and this runty little thing barely stumbled out into the consoles half finished and into the hands of basically no one. I know you may not remember it, but this hairline does not forget, okay? This game was not the instant hood classic we all thought it was. Which sounds insane to say given the way it's talked about, but in reality, most people didn't give a fuck about the Dark Souls franchise until 5 years after its initial release.
It's true. It's true. Like I know it. I think it was once Dark Souls 2 came out that it started to boom way more.
Once Bloodborne gave everyone an unscratchable itch for the formula.
See, that's what I fed too. Bloodborne made it because Bloodborne's so good.
As someone who's played this gem on a PS3, Dark Souls really was the demon souls of Dark Souls when it came out. But even despite all of its jank and shortcomings, Dark Souls was still able to offer players one of the most unique experiences that you could physically buy in one of those shrink-wrapped DVD box cases with the wrong game in it. I couldn't find it.
I have a system. You put it in the last game and you keep putting the disc and then you can backtrack the last 10 games you played.
So what made this game so special that it made everyone run out and not buy it until 5 years after its release?
Actually, Dark Souls 3 hype was up there. It was top tier because Dark Souls 3 came out after Bloodborne and everybody was like itching to see what's going to happen, where they would go with the series.
Well, it's actually a pretty complicated story, but to understand what was going on around the time of its launch, we have to go back to the year 2011.
Oh, such a long time ago.
Welcome to the year 2011. Shit's bitchin'. The United States just took out Osama bin Laden, but that's not stopping the game industry from dropping bombs like Skyrim, the official release of Minecraft, Dark Souls, Portal 2, etc. However, over the last several years, this
Wait, Portal 2 came out in 2011? Oh my god. Okay, so I never would have played Souls games if it wasn't for the fact that I was streaming. Because when I started streaming, I was looking for a game that I could stream that would attract people into the streams, that was engaging and interesting. And so I saw that a lot of people were benefiting and enjoying Dark Souls because Dark Souls had people love to watch people suffer. So I would like, okay, I'm gonna play Dark Souls and and play scary games, except I don't get scared. And so I was like, I'm gonna play Dark Souls 1 because I want to play something that's engaging and interesting and not oversaturated. So I started playing Dark Souls 1. I knew I was gonna hate it and I hated every second of it. But by the time I beat Dark Souls, I started to enjoy it.
There's been growing discomfort over the reduction in gaming difficulty, with many people placing the blame directly on casual players and the companies trying to cater to them. And while that's definitely a factor, in reality, our entire understanding of what a video game could be has radically changed over the course of the 2000s.
I do think as games have become more accessible to a broader audience, games will become inevitably easier because easier games are more accessible to everyone. And that's okay. I just like difficulty options. You know, if the game's going to be easy, give difficulty options and don't make them shit. Make them good. So Stockholder, basically Rocket. And now I'm hooked. I've played so many Souls games.
Games are becoming longer with a heavier emphasis on story and narrative, where deaths play kind of an unnatural part of that experience.
I'm going to die.
Health is now something that can regenerate. Hell, even the term game over feels like something your mom would say when describing the Nintendo Station 360. These aren't necessarily bad things per se, but for a lot of people, that sense of accomplishment that came from a solid challenge and a shared experience with friends had kind of evaporated. At the very same time though, we saw a massive increase in the inclusion of difficulty sliders, which makes a lot of sense. Rarely does one size ever fit all, and every pussy's different. But some were implemented vastly better than others, sometimes acting as a band-aid for shitty development and lazy balancing. While it did give players the options, most people didn't even know what the options were. To this day, I still don't even know what easy, medium, or hard even translates to half the time. Does it change?
Easy means basically walking simulator. Medium is the intended play. Hard is for those who want a challenge. But then also now hard has become what people will normally pick. So now they make hard easier. I don't know.
Change the number of enemies, the amount of health they have, their accuracy, detection, the amount of items that drop, the puzzles, and if it does, by how much? How the fuck am I, a new player to a game, supposed to know what best suits the gameplay? I much prefer having competent devs kind of figure that out for me, or at least change in-game things to match what difficulty I want. That's just me though. Obviously, a lot of games greatly benefit from this, but back then, people got super heated over this shit. As a result, this created fertile soil for a game that had greater difficulty to release around this time and carve itself a niche player base. Yeah, you all know what's coming next. Ooh, big twist, Dark Souls, the big hard game to spank all the people in the zippers and whips. That much is painfully obvious. But it's really not the full picture. In fact, it's just the tip of the iceberg. For us to understand where this game is even coming from, we have to go all the way back to the start of the 7th generation of console wars back in 2000.
2000?
It all starts with this one game called Demon's Souls. No, stop. Every motherfucker on YouTube gets this wrong. See, most people think that the director of the Soul series, Miyazaki, just decided to one day create Demon's Souls and then, we were off to the races. In reality, the game was already being developed before he even entered the picture while he was playing with Gundams in the corner. The real story of Demon's Souls starts with the release of the Xbox 360. And it is killing Sony. When developing the 360, Microsoft made the decision to speedrun 80% the creation of the console, and while it gave it a pretty nasty case of ringworm, it ended up beating Sony to market by a whole year, which was a huge blow to their finances. After all, you're more likely to buy the console that your friends already own, and that's especially true with the way they were pushing Xbox Live.
Check this out.
And if that wasn't enough, the console was also half the price of the PS3 whenever
That makes sense.
that came out. Keep in mind, we were still, for the most part, paying for music back then. Money was tight, people typically only bought one console, and yellow card CDs aren't going to pay for themselves. By the time the PS3 made its way to market, it had already priced itself out of the hands of many potential buyers. And it didn't help that it also had, no games on launch. Shocker! At this early
That's true. Games don't, there's never enough games. It's never worth it to buy a console on launch, honestly.
on, Sony is doing everything in their power to increase their market share, so they start spying on Microsoft for some ideas. One franchise in particular catches their eye, which goes by the name of the Elder Scrolls. They see that Oblivion is kicking ass and taking names, and they want a piece of that open world action RPG shitty ass.
I liked Oblivion. Skyrim is a sad husk of what Oblivion was.
AI market share.
I love dogs. Doesn't everyone?
No, they fucking don't! So they start shopping around in search of some jobs.
Oh, I know, Bloon, and I was very sad when the PS3 that we owned, my backwards compatible PS3, broke. It was a very sad day because I used to play PS2 games on it.
Cooperation with the studio that can create something similar when they spot a medieval dark fantasy series called Kingsfield by FromSoft. So they hit them up, they slip them a crisp $20 bill under the table and say, "We want a game that can dethrone Oblivion." So they shake hands and begin to create their own version of the Elder Scrolls.
You know what? I think, I actually can say, I think Souls games have triumphed over Elder Scroll games. I think they won. I think they won the battle.
They start building this thing, and about a year or two after the development, it's a congratulations, it's a piece of shit. It's so bad they can't even get their prototypes to run. Hey, FromSoft, ever happened to that Oblivion clone that we commissioned for you guys that was supposed to be pushing the boundaries of what video games can physically do in this day and age? Sir, we're the studio that made this. Yeah, that's our bad. It's so hopeless that Sony and FromSoft just agree to write the whole thing off as a silly round and move on. Sony ended up getting the rights to Oblivion anyway, so it worked out for them. However, word eventually makes its way to this guy named Miyazaki, who takes one look at the wreckage and sees the opportunity of a lifetime. So he asks around to see if he can take point on the game and lead it into a different direction and actually turn this thing into something marketable. The beauty part is though, even though he's never done something like this, if the project fails, no one gives a fuck. It's the perfect environment for him to spitball ideas.
That's true. When they don't give a if he does anything with it good or doesn't, there's no consequences, right? Because if it does well, it does well. I feel like Skyrim missed the mark because a lot of people who play Skyrim are older generations, you know? It's not hip and modern for the young youths of today.
Is with absolutely nothing to lose. So he dumps the idea of it being an Oblivion clone and goes in almost the opposite direction. He wanted to recreate that feeling of exploring a foreign world where you feel cautious with every step you take, and create an action RPG that didn't rely on simple quest completion as the reward. He instead set out to make the gameplay itself feel satisfying, compelling players to strategize and improve in order to overcome challenges, by making the game extremely punishing, placing the brunt of the responsibility on the player's skill itself.
That's the thing, they should have released the next Elder Scroll game 5 years ago.
Instead of just artificial difficulty.
Get good.
So when you die in the game, you don't think it's just because the game is poorly designed and unjust. Rather, I screwed up because I'm a dumbass and I need to be more careful. This turned death into a very teachable moment for the player. Something you really want to avoid doing because it halves your fucking health. Hard but fair, my ass. Miyazaki definitely went a little too far on this one, and even he knew it. Because when it came time for him to represent the game to Sony executives, he actually had to hide the fact that when you die, you lose half your health. And he was actually legitimately worried that he had made the game too hard once they had finally baked the whole thing together. But oops, too late, time to test the game out. They finally release it at the Tokyo Game Show, and people just kinda hate it. In one of the most historical moments of the franchise, the Sony executive even went on record after playing it and said this is an unbelievably bad game. And to his credit, this is something that everyone says when they try the Souls games out for the first time.
I mean, Demon Souls is old and janky. That's why they made a remake. But yeah, I could imagine at the time being like this horrible hard game. But I loved the remake. The remake was a little easy and a little convoluted. But you know, Dark Souls, it came together with Dark Souls.
It's just, you gotta get it out of your system. We'll get back to this. But the president is so ticked off by the game that he doesn't even let them release it outside of the country. It finally launches officially in Japan, and it just completely tanks, which always seems to be the case no matter what game I talk about on this channel. I swear, those motherfuckers only play like Pokemon and Pachinko. But people start importing the game into the West, and the sales numbers grow to about 100,000. Nothing
That's not bad. That's not bad. At least there's a niche audience for that.
huge here, but that's much better from 20K and pretty good for word of mouth. FromSoft are actually kind of happy about it, and people start asking for an official release in the States, so Atlas, yes, that Atlas, for some reason, roll the dice on it and decide to import the thing officially into the US. And sales ramp up. Over the next year, it would grow to sell 1 million copies, thanks in part to GameSpot elevating it to Game of the Year, which was an incredibly bold move at the time. There was a time period before game journalism turned into game journalism.
And GameSpot's 2009 Game of the Year is...
Shitty USB mic.
Demon Souls.
Wait, what? Demon Souls won Game of the Year? I didn't know this. I think almost every single FromSoft game has won Game of the Year.
Souls, so satisfying. And then there's all those dudes waiting there for you hard. And it just makes you feel this camaraderie even though you can't actually them in the game.
Here's the crazy part in all this. Miyazaki doesn't know that. The sales of Demon Souls didn't pick up until a whole year after he was already developing Dark Souls. The poison
I love that. He's like, I don't care if this game was good. I'm going to make another game. I don't care if this game's successful. I'm going to make another game.
stat on this guy is like insane. Even though he's still operating on the premise that Demon Souls was a failure, he still is confident enough that he knows what he needs to do this time around to perfect his formula. And once they get word of the cult following growing in the West, these guys go full steam ahead.
Is back with Dark Souls. Let's see what punishment they're dishing out.
Dark Souls. Let's see what punishment they're dishing out.
This time around,
This is why you play the new one. You don't play the old. You play the remake. You play the remastered or whatever it is. Play the remastered. Don't play the original.
Miyazaki has unequipped the gloves and is working one-on-one with every single developer. No creative managers, no micromanagers. This is some organic-ass farm-to-table development. He went ahead and named every single character, boss, enemy in the game, as well as every single line of text that appears, including menus. This guy knows exactly what he wants. However, it isn't just his vision. He explicitly instructs his artists to always add their own flair and touches to whatever designs they're working on, so they can give him a fresh perspective that he can incorporate. It's even reported that he'd constantly philosophize with his team about all the esoteric concepts of the game and how they all make sense in the context of the world they are continually writing and rebuilding. The reason he's doing this is that it's creating basically a bunch of little mini Miyazakis that are all on the same exact page as him during development. That's why he was so confident by letting the development of Dark Souls 2 go to like other members of his staff, because he wanted to see what the series would turn into without it being limited to him. Although that
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know Dark Souls 2 wasn't made directly by him.
it kind of had its own developmental hell, and they ended up actually firing one of the directors, but
Oh.
that's a different, that's a whole video I've been waiting to make. Miyazaki's spurging out on all the details when ding ding ding, they run into a problem and it's pencils down, you gotta turn it into shit. And it's not finished.
Oh no.
Not even close. So he does that thing where you just fill in the rest of the bubbles and hope you get a few extra points in. That's one of those areas in the second half of the game that feel kind of content-aware filled. Although they made one of the most revolutionary games in about a 2-year
I was wondering about that. Why did hell feel so lackluster?
span, so I don't know. Take it with a grain of salt. There's actually one final problem
The PTSD.
that they're running into now, and that's they don't have a name for the game. Sony still technically owns the rights to Demon Souls, and they can't use that. So this fucking genius decides to name the game Dark Race. Like, dog, how do you not? That's already They're in the game. Whatever. So he tries to settle on a name by calling it Dark Ring, which I think is fine, but apparently people around him were saying that's a
He always loved this ring. He loved Ring even back in 2011.
euphemism for butthole, so it's Project Dark for the time being. It makes its first public appearance at Tokyo Game Show once again under that same name, only for it to get quickly overshadowed by demos of Devil May Cry and The Last Guardian. The game finally launches globally, and Demon Souls fans are stoked on it. Weirdly enough, critics actually received it quite well. Its level design and satisfying combat earned it high marks for being quite different than the grain of current releases at the time, branding it with that notorious hard but fair reputation. But that reputation only applied to the people that actually saw the game through. For everyone else that played it, the game was notoriously hard and bullshit and kind of ugly and makes no fucking sense. And one of those hitboxes, and I swear I rolled that. I fucking rolled that. Only the first half of that hard but fair
I rolled that, I swear.
reputation seemed to stick to its branding, coming across as more of a gimmick to uninformed players. To the point where they even branded the DLC of the game Prepare to Die Edition to lean into that word of mouth, because at the time it was the only thing they really had going for them in terms of organic marketing. But aside from that niche of cult followers from Demon Souls, the real reason Dark Souls didn't pick up into an instant hood classic wasn't because the people that played it were getting pissed. It's because people weren't playing it at all. See, whenever a game is shown off through trailers or advertisements, its ultimate goal is to convey to you an experience. That's where the value is to a player. Turns out,
Good old phantom hitboxes. See, that's why the new version, the remake, did fix that. Because I mean, it was janky, but not that janky.
it's really fucking hard to do that if your game is unsexy. And Dark Souls had some pretty saggy-ass granny titties upon release. Around this time, games like Assassin's Creed, Devil May Cry, God of War all had not only phenomenal experiences, but they translated visually to just look like fun as shit games on their own. Watching Kratos swing around the blades of Olympus, it just makes every dude in the room look at it and just say, hell yeah.
Old school God of War. We do miss old school God of War.
That's what you want from your games. For
Oh,
example,
no.
I personally have never pulled a fire alarm, but do you think that's ever stopped me from fantasizing about it every single time I walk into a room and see one?
Ooh woo.
No, I mean, they're practically
Ooh
begging for it.
woo.
Look what it's wearing. Same principle applies here. Now, take that same logic and apply it to Dark Souls, and watching some tanky dude fat rolling only to eat shit later and slowly earn the right to get another hit in is not screaming satisfying achievement. Not to say it's not there, but its gameplay doesn't sell itself anywhere near as well as the other games in the franchise. Like, this is literally the gameplay footage that IGN showed when it was making its debut of the game to millions of people across the world.
Have played Demon Souls a lot, and now you move on to Dark Souls, there won't be a connection even with the online.
The posted failures have parry failures.
Okay,
It's just not sexy. And this is no surprise to the developers. Even Miyazaki admitted this after he released Demon's Souls at Tokyo Game Show, saying, quote, "You can't possibly understand its approach in 5 minutes." But aside from the gameplay, the actual graphics of the game aren't doing it any favors either. I personally love them. I think it rips. Sue me. I know it's nostalgia, the same way I look at like old PS2 games or something. I think it's beautiful. But let's be real, it's 2011 now. This console came out in 2006. Graphics have come a long ways, and we're actually at the end of the console's life cycle here. And this thing looks like some Call of Duty 3 shit. The standards have risen since then, and while graphics aren't everything, they're not nothing. After all, half the music I listen to on YouTube is solely determined by the thumbnail alone. I have zero clue what—
No, in comparison to other games that came out at the same time, they were kind of dog shit comparatively. Like, they came out at the same time as DMC and God of War and The Last Guardian, which is stunning in comparison, right?
what low poly drum and bass sounds like, but for some reason, this picture kind of tells me. Especially given that just a year prior, God of War released in 2010, which completely redefined what people expect graphically out of the system, and that game ran at double the frame rate of Dark Souls, which would barely hit 30 on a good day. I distinctly remember Blighttown running at a peanut buttery, chunky, smooth 15 frames per second. A lot of areas of this game would give it an FPS that would make Ocarina of Time look like an esport by comparison, which is even wilder when you consider that the thing that's making your system chug looks like that. The game suffered major performance difficulties, and that's without mentioning the load times, which after every death would be anywhere between—
Well, the thing is, like, Dark Souls, like, it is improved, and this is what this video is about. Like, Dark Souls shouldn't have succeeded, but somehow it did, even though it in lots of aspects was poorly optimized and poorly performed.
3 to 5 business days. These are the more cosmetic aspects of Dark Souls that made it difficult for new players to stomach. But upon release, the game was very different than the household Prepare to Die edition we've all grown to love. The original Dark Souls gave out a fraction of the souls upon killing bosses, making leveling significant—
Like, majority of people who've played Dark Souls played the 2015 version of Dark Souls, which was the Prepare to Die edition, which they fixed a lot of these issues.
significantly harder. Enemy AI would aggro way further out and even close the doors behind you in tight spaces. Curses, which have your health, could stack, meaning you could permanently divide your health in half each time. Just some brutalist, unfun shit. This one guy apparently made a video documenting even more of the changes. It's a great watch. I don't want to steal his thunder. Go watch it. But for all the people that managed to get past those hurdles, for most people, the hardest thing was that there were just no resources to understand what any of this stuff meant in the game. I'm taking your first look at the menu, and I don't know if I'm being graded on a test. I don't know what candle means. Not quite sure what a covenant does. To this day, I still don't fully grasp how the upgrade system works, and people are still finding out hidden mechanics within the game like 10 years later. Many veterans of the series will actually encourage new players to go in completely blind, and I think that's kind of a dickhead mentality. While I think people should avoid spoilers, I think every copy of the game should come with at least 3 to 4 older brothers that can educate you on just some of the more hidden mechanics of the game. Like the carry weight, for example, which can completely alter the entire fun—
This is why I think it's really important to have a friend that shows you the Souls games, and this is why I backseat my friend Ark when he was playing Dark Souls 1 for the first time, because if you go in blind with no backseating into the first Dark Souls, you will be so angry and so confused. I think a little soft backseating will really help make the experience more enjoyable.
Fundamental way the game is played, and it's never mentioned at all once. Thanks, game. Great design. Despite all of this though, it sold fairly well with the right audiences, and while it never caught on to the mainstream at the start, you could argue that the very things that held it back initially were the very same things that led to its explosion years later. By not catering to trends at the time, the game's baffling amount of just not giving a fuck and leaving the player to their own devices ended up delivering players one of the most uniquely satisfying franchises in the history of gaming. Because while Dark Souls may have some of the most annoying player-hating mechanics—
Now you still understand the level design of Dark Souls is so good. It's so good, guys. It's so good.
it still understands that the most important thing at the end of the day is the experience. I was hanging out with my boy Internet Pitstop while we were nerding out about the Dark Souls games when he brought a pretty interesting article to my attention. Miyazaki has had his works compared to the Zelda franchise numerous times, as they were such a huge inspiration for him when he was in school. When he was asked to comment on it, he goes on record saying that he thought his series wasn't even deserving to be mentioned in the same breath as Zelda.
Aww.
However, in that very same article, he makes the distinction that in Zelda games, you're often guided along an epic journey that's laid out before you as the player. But in Dark Souls, you get lost. And I can't think of a better way to describe this overall series. At the time, Dark Souls did something that no other games were doing upon release. That was A, shut the fuck up, And B, let the player get completely lost with minimal direction, allowing the player to be guided solely by their own curiosity. And it's reflected in every aspect of this game. Upon booting the game up for the first time, you might be surprised that regardless of its reputation, there's no emergency lights or bells or whistles or a waiver to sign away your rights to a safe word. Instead, you're greeted with some underwater ambience while you spend an hour customizing a character that you'll probably never see again in the game. The actual atmosphere of Dark Souls runs in stark contrast to its obnoxious reputation, giving it this kind of fairy tale, dreamlike, ketamine-filled aesthetic that runs through every corner of this game.
Oh shit. Who put this vent in my S?
I like that about it too. It's somewhat that kind of you choose your own adventure experience. I feel like a lot of times RPGs are like, here, have this horrible line of dialogue and this more dialogue, and that can be fine, but sometimes you want to just go and explore without having to talk to 20 NPCs. But also 100% get yourself a Sherpa. Get yourself a Dark Souls Sherpa to introduce you, just to understand the basic understandings of the mechanics.
I'm so lit, I'm hearing the character creation music playing again.
It's a game that doesn't even have background music for half the time, letting you just bask in its atmosphere. Dark Souls is very quiet in its approach. Its deliberate lack of music entrusts the player to leave the world's interpretation solely to your discretion. A theme that runs through every vein of its gameplay, storytelling, and who gives a shit, why am I telling you this? Because in Dark Souls, you are rarely encouraged on how to feel, what to think, or what to make of anything in the world. Whenever you are told something, there's typically a counter to it that's right around the corner, resulting in your actions and experiences feeling far more authentic and genuine. This is probably one of the core elements that
The only thing I can say that I really wish FromSoft learns is please make a quest log. Please, I beg of you, maybe a notebook where you can put down what NPCs told you, because I have severe ADHD and I forget what the NPC told me and I now let the NPC die. It's not about being lost. I don't mind being lost. I just want to remember what they told me. Just like a log of what they said to me.
That makes a Dark Souls game Dark Souls. The game treats you like an adult. It's allowing you to miss out on tons of great content and experience frustration. In exchange, you get to feel authentic reward and discovery whenever
Dear Diary, today the boss killed me for the 43rd time. This is bullshit.
you do accomplish something in the game. Now the question remains how much frustration should actually be there to give you that authentic feeling of reward, because in this game it's a little bit off kilter. There are areas that don't feel like much trouble. There are things that feel so incredibly batshit retarded that why the f would they ever leave that in? No good game designer would put that there intentionally. Yeah, here it is. But despite some of its annoying runbacks and some unrefined areas, the sheer volume and freedom afforded to the player means that you're the only thing holding yourself back. Aside from a few locked walls, the only thing that's restricting your discovery is your own perception and desire to explore. Because in Dark Souls, you're supposed to play in the out of bounds, and the invisible walls are only there to help you explore further. Because in this game, if you can see it, you can probably go there. Thanks in no small part due to its work. Out of all of the Souls games,
I actually think the map design is what makes Dark Souls so good.
the original is the only title to feature a one-world open linear map design. For the most part. The entire world snakes through itself in a miasma of castles, forests, ruins, Jewish tunnels, and caves, all connected through secret passages that loop back around to previously found checkpoints. It's an impressive addition to the game world that gives you that feeling of, oh, I actually know where I am after not knowing where you are for 4 hours, only to go back out and forget again. But I never really gave that much of a shit about it. I still feel like it baits out a lot of misplaced praise for what actually makes the level design so fantastic. I've seen plenty of interconnected worlds done in many other games, and they're not talked about nearly as much as Dark Souls 1's. Because at the end of the day, it matters what's in the game world itself that makes it noteworthy. I look at the interconnected worlds the same way I would like a nice glass or a fancy straw. It's a fun addition, but it all depends on what I'm drinking that's going to keep me slurping. In Dark Souls, the looping world isn't what's inspiring me to adventure.
Technically, Dark Souls is a Metrovania game, which is what Metro Prime is. And Castlevania. It's that kind of interconnected world like that. And that is what Hollow Knight is as well. I've not seen the Dark Souls 2 map, but I have played Dark Souls 2. And it was terrible.
It's the dreamlike environments themselves and all the extra content hidden away in them. It's the fact that I can do things out of order. It's the fact that I can miss double-digit hours of content because I might have missed a hidden path behind not one, but 2 invisible walls, only to wind up at some of the coolest areas in the game. It's the fact that every corner of this world feels like a destination deliberately placed with intention, which rewards keen observation. It's the reason people see try jumping near a cliff surrounded by 10 bloodstains and still try jumping. Because sometimes try jumping gets you something. The world is constantly teasing you to think outside the box and test its own boundaries.
You know what's funny, Valkyrie? I feel like there's two types of people. People that like all the Dark Souls games but hates Dark Souls 2, or people that love Dark Souls 2 and that's their favorite Dark Souls game.
There's a great satisfaction to finding those looping shortcuts, and the lack of loading screens does help immersion. But I don't see why that satisfaction can't be replaced with the portal or just an easier means of warping. And the lack of having the warp at the start of the game does rain on my parade a bit, knowing I still have to backtrack for 5 minutes, even with the shortcut unlocked. Some people say it encourages exploration, but I found the opposite to be true because I didn't want to get stuck resting at a bonfire that would force me to climb my way back out the way I came. Regardless of all that, the world design is still incredibly well thought out. Every step you take in this game makes you think twice about where you're going with intention.
I hate those guys.
Okay, it's pretty well thought out. What's even more impressive though is that searching through the world you won't find just simple upgraded weapons with rare, epic, or legendary statuses as you progress. Instead, each fragment of armor, each sword, shield, and item come with a name and a story. Even the most mundane objects reveal something about the person carrying it, their true intentions, ulterior motives, offering insights about the area itself that tell the true
I really wish I would read items more. Maybe in Dark Souls 3 I will read all the items.
story of what's really going on in this world. The best part is it allows one of the heaviest stories that exists in gaming to be completely non-intrusive, allowing me to just sit back and roleplay as a illiterate Neanderthal who's not too educated in the fine arts of delayed gratification. Thankfully, people much smarter than I have pieced the story together and are still working on it to this day, leaving me to just sit back to enjoy the game. Without going into super specifics, because I already know that you know how the Souls games work, except for like 2 of you. Hi, Mom and Dad. I will say that all the mechanics of the Dark Souls game.
That's the thing, Pause. Like diehard Souls game players, they read the lore, but then like Elden Ring brought in so many like casual Souls players that don't read all the items, and I know that I should actually read all the items, but I don't. One day.
Games all exist within a vacuum outside of the others, with their own sets of rules and logic. Dark Souls 1 takes a slower, almost more cerebral approach, where player actions are much more of a long-term commitment in terms of time and stamina. Some of these windups come with like a 30-year mortgage. Unlike Dark Souls 3, shields actually work, armor actually matters, and spamming rolls would get you killed more often than not. If Dark Souls 3 is a dance, Dark Souls 1 is sumo wrestling. Where DS3 felt more rhythmic, rewarding player for their reaction time, the tempo of DS1 almost feels like turn-based in comparison. A player from each game will most likely hate the combat of the other until they can get acclimated to it. Although DS1 probably offered the most in terms of variety in its combat of the trio. Since you weren't forced to just twink around rolling 24/7, doing things like two-handing your weapon as a strength build would massively increase your damage output. You can be a ninja just as much as you want to be a tank, which is something that wouldn't be rewarded as much in later games. That and the magic and pyromancy in the game was completely busted too, so you had a ton of different viable options to play this game however you wanted. Even though it feels clunky as shit, the fact that you can play this game completely out of order and with so many different players.
That's actually that's exactly how I played the game. So I played Dark Souls 1, Elden Ring, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and then Elden Ring again, and eventually Dark Souls 3. And I played some Lies of P in there too.
Styles gave it a ton of replayability that the later games didn't offer as well since they were a little bit more clamped down on your exploration. One of the reasons the combat in Dark Souls felt so satisfying though, and this is something that spans the entire series, is that general enemies take anywhere from about 2 to 5 hits to dispatch on average. On average. The difficulty of the game doesn't come from just artificial boosting of enemy health pools, but instead puts the onus of survival on your own skillmanship. Nothing in this game is outside of your ability to overcome it. However, the key thing though is that the game doesn't just make you improve on skill alone, you also have the means to improve your weapon quality and increase your levels, resulting in you out.
What do you mean? I like sandwiches too. I like grilled sandwiches.
Putting higher damage, requiring less inputs to take out enemies. Even just going from 4 hits to 3 hits feels massive over the course of these games, where a lot of other sword fighting games would diminish the experience by having you slowly chip away at enemy health bars. While I do love the combat of this game,
I do like when games have it that's challenging, not because it takes forever to kill the enemy, because my ADHD brain can't.
it still feels quite dated compared to some of the later installments in the series. Boss fights, while grand in presentation, kind of fall flat, leaving much to be desired in terms of movesets. Outside of bosses, the game does throw a smorgasbord of frustrating level design mechanics where gravity seems to kind of pick and choose when to kill you. And once you feel like you have your feet under you, the game will just throw in like some rickety ass bridge to throw you off your tone. Like, what the fuck was that for? And previously, if you had brought any of this up to players at the time, you'd be stonewalled with the automatic get good, which would often act as a deflection against any sincere and valid criticism. Although I will say, I do like the culture of just not allowing any excuses whatsoever, because there is still no shortage of people that will just complain of this game without getting better themselves. We've all been there. The reason I bring all this up, though, is that I recently...
See, that's the thing what I liked about Sekiro, and I know technically I need to still beat the end boss in Sekiro, okay? But I really like that if you got good enough in Sekiro, you could fight enemies so fast.
Convinced one of my good YouTube buddies to give Dark Souls 1 a try after he'd previously loved Elden Ring, Dark Souls 3, and enjoyed Sekiro above all the others. Yeah, I know, he's one of those guys. After I was watching him play for a bit, I started to get that same feeling of like whenever you show your good friend that that really funny YouTube video, and it's been like 3 minutes and they haven't laughed yet, and you can start to feel your social credit being deducted. He absolutely hated the game, and I just kind of rolled my eyes and hit him with a couple get goods, because that's the same exact shit he said when he played Dark Souls 3 for the first time, and he ended up loving that. After all, the human brain will always try to rationalize and make excuses to justify emotions, regardless of accuracy. Except he kept on hating the game, at least in terms of the other Souls games that he's played, and he started to bring up some valid criticism that I happen to agree with. Like some of the backtracking, enemy placements, the unfinished second half of the game, some of the level design and unfair bullshit that's anti-player, the RNG factor, the lack of thrilling boss fights, etc., etc. It's easy to find flaws within every single corner of this game. It's far from perfect. But there's one thing that stood out to me as a testament to this game's core design, and it's the reason I still put it above so many others out there despite its flaws. No matter how much he was bitching to me and bemoaning all the problems with the game, and making me feel like a dumbass for even recommending it to him, he kept coming back to it, and he eventually beat it. And you don't do that shit to games you don't enjoy. Or at least don't completely hate. I would like to talk far more about the actual mechanics of Dark Souls 1, but I'm actually going to be opening that can of worms when
I'm actually wrong. I played Demon Souls in between Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne. I played Demon Souls Remake.
I talk about Dark Souls 2, which is going to be far more in depth. I've been wanting to make that video even longer than this one. If you want to kindle the channel and get recognized in the video, your support on Patreon means the world to me, and I appreciate every single dollar you throw my way. There's also some extra tutorials and behind the scenes of how I even make these videos in the first place, if that's something that interests you. In the meantime, I've got Twitter, where I won't update you on anything that I'm doing, and I will see you later.
Beautiful. That deserves a like. That was fun. That was a lot of interesting stuff that I like to learn more about things and stuff.